to be honest. So we started as part of the educational engagement. So educational engagement were traditionally really focused on the kind of outreach and access into university aspects. So there's teams that will go out on school visits and kind of based around familiarity with university and applying to university. And then also we have kind of more programs of sustained engagement with students from the local area. But there's a bit of a recognition there that the barriers kind of success and progression within university still exist after joining university. So the Pulse programme really came about in relation to that, really. So it started in earnest in 2014. Prior to that, we were supporting a small group of students who had means tested scholarships. So we've kind of expanded on from there to kind of take on quite a few more students, and we're kind of quite a substantial kind of part of the kind of university community now. So what we do is kind of all around addressing kind of inequalities and differences in kind of different forms of capital within the university as well. And we're kind of a bit of a growing and evolving team, really. So as we're going along, we're kind of understanding more about what those barriers are, kind of from our own research and kind of from listening and working with students as well. So very much a kind of about development and kind of listening to ideas and things like that, really. So next slide, please, Lucy. So there's a kind of list here of the groups that we do support. So there's quite a few different groups in terms of care leavers and estranged students as well. So students who are studying independently, no parental support. We have a named contact who supports those students. We kind of have things available in terms of kind of support with moving in and kind of support with housing and things like that. Students entering from areas of low participation as well. So I'll kind of talk a little bit more about that and kind of what I mean by that in shortly. We also kind of administer means tested scholarships for those students as well. We have a small postgraduate cohort as well of people who are in receipt of a master's scholarship as well, and also sanctuary scholarships, a small amount of scholarships for those who are forced migrants as well. And people like former young carers, but the main body of our student group is students who are eligible for things like access to leads, reach for excellence, realising opportunities, and other kind of contextual admission schemes. So they take into account things like whether you're the first generation to kind of go to university, things like the performance of the school you went to, the area that you live in and things like that. So it's kind of around the familiarity of the kind of university environment again, very much so. So we do support kind of quite a high amount of students, like I said. Next slide, please, Lucy. So all in all, at the minute, we have around just short of 4,400 undergraduate students. So like I say, it's quite a substantial community and quite a kind of broad-ranging community. We have quite, like I said, quite a few people who've completed access to leads. There's also students who have completed foundation courses as well. We're kind of quite mixed ethnically as well. And then in terms of mature students, there are quite a few as well. So we've also got quite a high proportion of students who are from either like Yorkshire and the Humber, so around 40% of students, and then Northwest and Northeast as well. And in terms of postgraduate, although we've got the smaller numbers, there are those postgraduate students who have progressed through from undergraduate study, and also those who are joining us afterwards. Quite a substantial amount are also mature students as well. So I think thing is with this, we've always kind of worked with like particular metrics before, so things like kind of low participation neighbourhoods, things like first generation, but I think part of the conversation we want to start having is around whether there's any benefits in opening up that conversation to be more about social class rather than using these kind of measures that are almost ciphers for talking about class. So we kind of want to, it's part of a discussion we'd like to have like later on in this session is around that really, just to see what people's thoughts are on it and things. So the next slide, please, Lucy. So in terms of the low participation neighbourhoods, this is kind of something that we've started using in isolation. So it's always been used in some respect as part of the criteria for access to Leeds, but we've recently started to identify additional students who've not taken part in any contextual enrichment programmes that do come from low participation neighbourhoods. So we use 2 geographical data sets, so one called Polar that is just about progression into higher education, and then we use IMD, which is index of multiple deprivation. So that is like takes into account a lot more factors than education. So the map on the left shows the kind of range of areas, with the darkest areas being the kind of highest ranking for deprivation within the IMD data set. So as you can see, there's kind of quite a lot of inner city areas, like particularly in the north, but we've also got that coverage of kind of maybe like the smaller towns and cities outside the metropolitan areas, as well as the coastal areas as well. So kind of using this, it really helps us to kind of identify kind of additional students who haven't come through any other routes, but it's also kind of allowing us to open up a little bit more thinking on how we kind of draw from this an additional kind of theoretical underpinning to kind of understand more about students from a kind of really sociological, geographical perspective. So in terms of kind of mobility, where students are moving from, whether they're commuting students, there's some really good work by, so Lisa Mackenzie came and did a guest lecture at the university seminar, just around like some that cosmopolitanism, I would say. So the kind of smaller towns that are kind of outlying larger cities, that kind of notion of being left behind, and the work opportunities not necessarily being there in the way that they maybe have been in the past, and kind of, ending up being like the kind of work opportunities are like the kind of warehouse things, Sports Direct, kind of Amazon warehouses and things like that. So yeah, I think there's a lot for us to work through from that perspective. So yeah, kind of quite at the beginning of this, but then kind of working out how we kind of relate that to kind of social class as well. So I'll hand over to Lucy for the next part of the presentation.
Thank you. I just noticed on the captions it called me Lucifer then. So Emily's provided kind of a bit of context in terms of who we're actually working with on the PLUS programme. So I suppose there's kind of a bit of divisiveness in terms of separating out various groups. For example, white working class students. I know that white working class boys, for example, have been identified as a group that aren't maybe progressing onto university as much as other groups. I mean, we kind of look at it with a sort of intersectional approach. So for example, our working class students could also be mature students. They could be from an ethnic minority. They could be an Australian student, for example. And I've just kind of picked out a few of these sort of headlines that relate to this kind of idea of aspiration as well, which I think is quite an interesting one. Now, I used to work, before I worked in the PLUS programme, I worked in outreach, so working with pre-entry students for the National Collaborative Outreach Project. And some of the work we did was around raising aspirations, and I think raising aspirations has been something that's existed within sort of outreach work for quite a long time. And obviously, it is important aspect of the work, but at the same time, I think we need to acknowledge that these students are not lacking in aspiration as such. It's more that there are other barriers out there that are perhaps stopping them from getting into certain career areas, or into postgraduate study, for example. Quite a few sort of higher education experts have criticised this idea of the lack of aspiration being the problem. And I've just put a few sentences from a wonky article by Neil Harrison and Richard Waller. And Neil Harrison's a very interesting person to follow on Twitter if any of you use that. He's written some really interesting stuff. So they kind of say, that's not the main barrier. And in fact, a lot of disadvantaged young people actually have very high aspirations. It's more that there are other barriers that are perhaps stopping them from achieving what they want to. And there's also that kind of idea of raising aspirations kind of focuses that the problem is on the individual young person or mature person, rather than the sort of wider structural inequalities. So we want to kind of address that because actually, that's not the issue. It's usually the structures and the inequalities around these people that we're working with that are the issue. He also makes quite an interesting point in this article as well about pushing students towards like narrow conceptions of what success actually is. And I think sometimes, especially in Russell Group universities, it might feel for students like the only way they can be successful, whatever that is by going onto a graduate scheme at like one of the big companies and living in London and getting a high salary and that kind of thing. And I think sometimes the discourse, even from the university itself, can kind of perpetuate that view. And in the PLUS programme, we run a lot of careers-related events and employability sessions, but we also want the students to know that the idea of success isn't just reduced to your salary or what company you work for or what job you're doing, And being at university is a time to explore all different new things, to make the most of any opportunities that come forwards, to see what you like. And if they don't work out, then that's absolutely fine. If you do an internship with PwC or something and you absolutely hate it, then that's fine. You shouldn't have to follow perhaps what you think you should be doing, kind of thing. And also there's an interesting point in an article I was reading, which was about the discourse of raising aspirations kind of being based on the predication of becoming middle class to succeed, which is quite interesting. I think yesterday there were quite a lot of discussions in our Being Working Class and HE conference about whether if you're working class when you come to uni, do you sort of become middle class afterwards once you've got a degree? How do you stay the same? It's quite an interesting concept. And I think there's a bit of a kind of internal conflict with students, perhaps, where they might feel a bit like there's sort of a bit of conflict between maybe what their roots and their background is and maybe what is almost expected of them from this Russell Group University. And I just added in this news article that was in the BBC only quite recently about the civil service, which I thought was quite interesting because we do run quite a lot of sessions about working in the public sector, and we've run sessions from the civil service and like the NHS before. But this idea that it's kind of sad that this still hasn't gone away, that this idea that you have to have polish over performance. So actually just being good at your job isn't enough. And I think there were some comments in that article of things, people talking in Latin and things like that, which you kind of hope that stuff had gone away, especially in the civil service and government jobs, but I don't think it has, unfortunately. But I think it's quite a difficult one for us to tackle because it's more of a structural issue rather than something that we can change from the PLUS programme. But I mean, if people have ideas of anything we can do to kind of tackle that, then we'd be really interested to know. So leading on from that, it's like this idea of supplementing aspiration with structural support. So our students who've got to Leeds University or on the PLUS programme clearly do have a lot of aspiration and have attained very highly and worked really hard to actually get on their course, you know, because if they hadn't, they wouldn't be at Leeds. And in the PLUS programme, we aim to sort of provide the support systems to allow students to achieve their aspirations, whatever those aspirations are, because the barriers are often financial or sort of structural, or might relate to a lack of social or cultural capital. It might relate to a lack of sort of contacts in a certain area, for example. So one of the biggest things we do is our Opportunities Fund, which is basically financial support where students can apply for money to support them to do things like attend conferences, go abroad, although that's obviously not happened as much this year, sort of do volunteering, do placements, go to networking events, we'll pay for smart clothing and things, because it's often, you know, the students get offered these interviews and get offered these opportunities, but they might think, oh, I just really can't afford that train ticket to London. So we want to get rid of that barrier because that shouldn't be an issue. And we've probably spent about 35k this year on that fund. So we've helped quite a lot of students, and they do write a report afterwards, and they're actually, some of them are really nice to read because the students clearly are very passionate about whatever they've gone on to do, and are kind of just glad that they've been able to have this opportunity where the transport has been paid for or whatever. Because, you know, a train ticket to London can be quite expensive, or staying in a hotel and things like that. So we don't want that to be a barrier. And we also sort of offer alumni mentoring coaching. So we've got quite a lot of generous alumni from the university. We work with the alumni development team who offer to have like one-on-one coaching sessions or group sessions with a lot of our students in particular who might be interested in jobs in particular areas. So for example, I've just got a quote from a student here who met with one of our alumni who works in banking now for HSBC and has been mentoring various students, which has given them kind of extra confidence and given them that insider knowledge that they might not have necessarily been able to get from anywhere else. So all of our activities that we run are kind of based around our theories of change. So I've got them up on the screen here. So when we kind of want to run an event or an activity or offer something, we always think kind of how is it going to help these theories of change. So sense of belonging is a massive one, and it is a massive one that's being looked at by the university as a whole. So and we really kind of pride ourselves on trying to help students feel settled, and we do lots of transition work, and we're planning transition work in July for all of the Access to Leeds students, so that they don't feel like a fish out of water, so that they actually do feel you know, part of the university community, feel settled, feel like they understand what's going on, and feel like they also are surrounded by students like them as well. And also, as I've mentioned, finance can often be a massive issue. So financial barriers to opportunities, also things like information, advice, confidence, academic confidence, and also employability skills. So in having access to opportunities, information, networks, that kind of thing. I think the confidence one, again, is it's quite a difficult one for us to kind of tackle. So that's one where it's less of a tangible thing, I suppose. So when we're trying to organise events and things, we do try and think, how could this increase students' confidence? So again, if any of the colleagues on the call have sort of suggestions of how any activities you've done in the past that you think has helped with that, then we'd be really interested to find out about that. Although one thing that we have, we're keen to develop more, is encouraging more students to do things like study abroad. So this summer, hopefully, depending on travel restrictions, we've got various students who are going on summer schools. So for example, to Madrid on a summer school about economics, for example. And we have offered all of our PLUS programme students a £500 scholarship to go towards their costs for that, but also additional funding for their kind of flights and accommodation. because I think carrying out an experience like that definitely does increase your confidence. It can be quite scary to just go to a foreign country and go and study with a bunch of people you've never met. But I think it massively would build your confidence. And I'm saying that from a personal perspective because I did a year abroad when I was at uni and it was terrifying. But at the end of it, I definitely was a more confident person. So just in terms of kind of other ways we kind of try and build that feeling of community with students, over the last year or so, we've tried to use our LinkedIn page and Instagram more as well to kind of build up that feeling of community, especially given that students haven't physically been seeing each other because of the lockdowns and things. Because not in a normal year, we would run face-to-face events where it would be very social and students could chat to each other. But we've had to do those online this year, which, as we all know, is a bit different. So we've been trying to share sort of student stories, and we find that they're always the posts that get kind of the most likes and the most interaction, because they're the ones that our students are most interested in. And we want, especially with LinkedIn, we want students to kind of share their stories, but also challenges as well, and be honest. And we've run a couple of LinkedIn workshops alongside, it's the employability and progression assistants that have run them for us, to show students how to kind of network and how to self-promote on LinkedIn, and also how to connect with people that they might potentially be interested in sort of a professional capacity. And we've had some really good feedback from those workshops. But I would say we do actually struggle to get students to share their success stories with us. And I don't know if it's because there's like a feeling of kind of, oh, I don't want to show off kind of thing, like, or a bit of imposter syndrome in that students feel like, oh, it's not that good what I've done. I think, yeah, there is a bit of that, but we do really want to kind of, share these stories and share these successes, because it does help kind of students in younger years to think, oh, that person's like me and they can do it, so I can do it, kind of thing. Yeah, we have shared and kind of worked with societies like the Social Mobility Society, who are great, who also use things like LinkedIn to promote their work and to sort of share things with students as well. The middle post is, I've been trying to get students to share their sort of dissertation pictures, as we know that it's such a massive achievement for them to have completed their dissertation in a pandemic, let alone in a normal year. So yeah, interestingly, I've not had any male students share anything. So I don't know if there's a reason for that, or but yeah. So if there are any postgraduate students on here, please do share your stories and pictures with us, because I love sharing things like this. I think it's really great. So yeah, maybe it's just because they're just too busy. These are just these are just a few examples of our comms with students. So we send a weekly newsletter to all of our postprogram students, which is a bit of a sort of roundup of what's going on. It includes our own activities, but also we share activities that we think might be of interest, because we know that there's always a lot going on around the university, but students, I think, receive like millions of emails, are a bit overwhelmed with what's going on. So we try to sort of do a bit of an overview of that week in our newsletter. And the language that we use in it is quite, we try to make students feel like they belong and their feelings are valid, and it's quite kind of, it's not too serious, the language that we use, want it to be friendly, and we kind of want to help students feel that they are part of this community, even if they aren't sort of physically seeing each other. We did do a study in the 2019-20 academic year, which was a randomized control trial with our newsletters, to find out what the sort of optimum amount of information was to get students to read our newsletters and to sort of click through the links. So we've based our current newsletter style on that, where we don't overload students with too much information, but we do include the activities that we think they really want to know about. So we have these themes, so future, support and experience. So we often share kind of employability things, but social activities as well, and also kind of well-being and support related information too. We do also ask for feedback every term on the Plus programme overall, but also we ask specific questions about the newsletters. And just on this next slide, just to end the presentation, I've got some quotes that we've had from students, which I think make us quite proud of the comms that we send out, because they're quite positive. Obviously, not every single comment is positive, but it's really nice to receive feedback like this. So I'll let you read it. I think these particular ones stuck out because it's this idea of feeling like a community and feeling surrounded by people they can relate to, and also the idea that it's authentic, I think is really positive that students see it like that. Just to say as well, from the feedback that we do get, we do genuinely kind of act on that when we're planning our events and activities. So we do read it all, you know, and we do try to offer events and activities that are tailored to what the students have asked for. And we try to ask them sort of what the best time is to run events and things like that, so it kind of fits around most people's schedules. So I think that was the last slide. I was just going to say, in terms of, I know this has been a topic that's on everyone's minds recently about online sessions. So obviously the last year we have had to run sessions online, but I think like, for example, the Community Society mentioned this might have been more beneficial for some of their students. So I think it might have been more beneficial for some of our students as well, running some of our sort of more information-based sessions or workshops online. But we do think in terms of the social aspect, that has been missing this year. So we are hoping that we can do in-person social events next year, just to allow for that sort of organic meeting of other students and the chatting that kind of doesn't always happen on Zoom or on Teams.
Yeah. One thing we have done really, really well though is we've been doing film and takeaway nights and they've gone down really, really well. So just sending out a Just Eat voucher and all choosing a film that we want to watch together, and then a discussion afterwards. And they tend to be kind of really oversubscribed, don't they?
Yeah, every time we've advertised one of those, the places have gone in about half an hour. It's like we send the newsletter out and 150 places have been gone, have been taken up. So yeah, I think that's been I think students have just said it's been a nice break from studying. Like it's almost like they're forced to relax and watch a film and eat a takeaway because they've signed up to the social. So yeah, that's been quite positive. So yeah, I think I don't know if anybody had any comments or wanted to ask any questions to Emily and I. Please feel free. I'll just have a look at the chat.